came across this clip over the weekend. This is from 2018, but I really liked watching this, not just because it was actually good journalism that you rarely get to see, but because this is a preview of what we are going to see in 20 years with these pro-Israel politicians, or anybody that is coming of age in this time and seeking power who wants to get elected office. Where did you stand on Gaza? Where did you stand on the genocide of the Palestinian people? Because there's a lot of revisionist history that happens. But Margaret Thatcher, the conservatives, Ronald Reagan, the conservatives in this country, in the 80s were immensely supportive of the apartheid regime in South Africa. They accused the ANC of being communists and terrorists as well. And there were many of the same tactics of suppression used against college students protesting apartheid at that time. So this is an interview in 2018 when Theresa May, who at the time was involved in politics but was not supportive of Nelson Mandela and the ANC in the efforts to combat apartheid, going in 2018 to visit Robben Island where he was imprisoned to honor him. And Channel 4's Michael Crick asks her, basically, how do you have the gall?
Visit Robben Island. You were active in politics in the 70s and 80s. What did you do to help release Nelson Mandela?
Well, I think what is important is what the United Kingdom did. And
what did you do? What did you do? Did you go on protests? Did you get arrested outside the embassy? Did you boycott South African goods? Did you do anything?
I think you know full well that I didn't go on protests, Michael. But what is important is the work that the United Kingdom...
Well, did you boycott South African goods?
The work that the United Kingdom government did to ensure that it was able to give support where that support was
Hang on a moment.
needed.
At that stage, Mrs. Thatcher believed that Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. Were you a loyal Conservative Party member? Did you think the same thing?
What was important was the support that the UK government was giving at the time, often support behind the scenes, but in other ways too.
But not Theresa May.
To ensure that we saw the result that we did in relation to the ending of apartheid here in South Africa.
A government led by a woman who thought that Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. Now, you're going to be going to Robben Island. Aren't you going to be feeling guilty that at the time Nelson Mandela was on Robben Island, you, Theresa May, did nothing to help his release, you personally?
What I will be feeling, I think, when I go to Robben Island, is to recognise the immense statesmanship of a man who spent so many years incarcerated.
Statesmanship?
And when he came out of that incarceration, had that...
He was incarcerated in part due to the fact that
revolutionary resistance.
the Western governments like the UK and the United States were supportive of the apartheid regime and did not pressure the white apartheid regime to release their biggest political prisoner because that was a threat to their power. And I just found that to be a fun clip for how she squirms, but also basically a window into the future.
Well, and the present, like there's a reason that South Africa still hasn't got around to the land reforms that were promised in those good times in the 90s. And it's because probably that's actually the role that Britain plays is, okay, you're going to get rid of apartheid. Let's see how to do this in a way that actually is fine for capital. So that's actually the role that people like that played when they say they played a role, because the real radical role that got apartheid out of there was played by radicals like Mandela, or I mean, we had Ronnie Cows was on communists who helped sabotage efforts and sort of armed resistance like the MK, which obviously Britain was not supporting behind the scenes.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So behind the scenes that it was almost indiscernible.
Yeah, we're literally calling the guy a terrorist.
This is like the video equivalent of like when the CIA tweets like "Happy Martin Luther King."
Yeah,
Day,
exactly,
everyone."
exactly. Well, okay.
We remember a civil rights hero that we absolutely did not tell to commit suicide when he during his time.
Okay, and and not just that he was deemed a terrorist. He was deemed a terrorist until 2008. He was on the terrorist watch list. Nelson Mandela, and then these Western governments have the gall to herald the figures who actually made the sacrifice as heroes and pretend we were with them all along. This is what will happen in 20 years, but hopefully we'll have a new crop of leaders then that were involved in boycotting Israel, in dismantling this project, in standing up for the Palestinian people. And they'll be able to answer that question better than Theresa May.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of books to read, Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela is another one that everybody probably should read. I think the audiobook's pretty widely available too, but he frankly talks about things like armed resistance and sabotage and even terrorism. And, obviously he says terrorism, we decided not to do it, obviously for just distasteful reasons of committing it, but also it would have a negative effect. But he says that if the fight got so dire that was the only thing that they were left to, I would just read those chapters and maybe see if there's any other things it applies to in terms of who's responsible for when violence breaks out in a colonial situation.